Hello, and thank you for choosing this video. If you want to hear all about the AWS reInvent conference, then stick around. Hello, and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. This is going to be a review of the AWS reInvent 2023, which happened just recently at Las Vegas. The event has been really quite extensive, and we'll probably try and cover as much as we can, although obviously we probably can't do it justice. But let me introduce my guest, who's back on the channel again. Really nice to see John back again. So John, how are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Thank you very much for having me back. It's always fun to chat to you on these things, actually.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you back. So John, just a quick intro to yourself and kind of your role at AWS, please.
Yeah, definitely. So John Hammond, so I've been with AWS for about 3.5 years now. I run our compute business for EMEA. So that consists of all of EC2, networking, high performance computing, visual computing, and a whole bunch of fun, slightly more esoteric stuff. So quantum computing, autonomous vehicles, and serverless as well comes into that. So yeah, fun, varied role, looking after a load of our interesting technologies for EMEA.
Fantastic. And I know you're into all of that stuff. So I think that's why you probably enjoy your job quite a lot. So it's great to see that. And yeah, and great to have you back as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, for me, I've done this since I was tiny. I think I started coding my BBC Micro when I was 3. I got my A-level computer science when I was 13. So I'm quite into it from an early age, if that makes sense. So I feel sometimes that I am extraordinarily lucky that I get to work on something that I genuinely enjoy. And one of the nice things, and I say this to everyone, I think the fact that I get to stay technical as well as doing some of the leadership stuff is just it's just brilliant. It's exactly
and that's something we need to go back to the BBC Micro, and going back to our roots. We ought to do that talk separately. I think that would be cool.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's one of these things that I think it really helped me getting into tech from an early age. I think I'm very lucky in terms of the position. So so did that, and so I can talk through some of my views on reInvent. It's for people that haven't been, I'll give some details about what it is, and for people that haven't been, it is genuinely a place and an event like nothing else I have ever seen or been to in my life before.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so hopefully we'll let's get cracking on a few stuff on the review of that. I think it'll be good to highlight a few things. So I kind of picked up on a sort of few main themes that were sort of going on at the conference. So certainly AI sort of infrastructure. There was a lot of focus from you guys on that in terms of training and inference and things like that.
Yeah.
There was also the kind of the tools being made available to build large language models and for and other sort of foundation models in that space as well, which again I think is obviously helpful for developers and so on. And then obviously the applications that would that can kind of leverage these foundation models. What were kind of some of the other themes maybe you picked up either from customers or some of the talks that you did?
Yeah, so loads of things. I think I mean, I would definitely say, as most people realize, it's interesting when you look back a year. That, I mean, a year ago from now, there were the starting pieces around generative AI. You've got interesting bits of where LLMs were going, but they were very far from production. I don't think people were really using most workplaces. If you'd said to them this time last year, what's your AI strategy? What's your LLM strategy? I think they probably would have been maybe not had answers. I think the reality is the rise of people just using AI for their daily basis has been unbelievable. I think one of the big changes, I mean, so it's interesting. I think history is a really interesting thing to look at. So I'm a firm believer that history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. And it's interesting if you look back. We often talk about the fact that AI is going to take jobs and these jobs are going to disappear.
Yeah.
I used to be a BlackBerry administrator, which I think is always amazing because it's a job that no longer exists whatsoever now. A BES administrator. And I think it's interesting when you look at the rise of the kind of initial rise of the iPhone, because I think actually what happened to it is very, very close to what's happening with generative AI. realistically, back in the days when I was a BlackBerry administrator, the iPhone turned out. Suddenly, everyone wanted an iPhone because they went by themselves and they bought them, they used them, they understood the ease of use that's set around it.
Yeah.
And that kind of suddenly people started using them in environments they weren't. There were loads of data leaks. There were loads of issues that people would kind of start to do these things they maybe shouldn't. And so all of a sudden, you went into a point where corporate iPhones started being delivered, and we kind of moved that way. I think that's exactly what's happening with AI at the moment. That, the amount of people, and we've seen various studies around it, the number of people that are almost using illicit tooling within their workplace, where they've decided to sign up for a personal account for, one or more of these very large AI providers, which they're now kind of putting lots of data in, is kind of really done that. Really one of the cornerstones of the announcements we had, and you see that in things like Bedrock, you see that in Amazon Q, I can go to why I think it's interesting, is this idea of having enterprise grade manageable LLMs where you have choice, where you own your own data, where it's secure, where it kind of fits in with those whole things. And in the number of conversations that we had with all manner of customers from over the spectrum who are really looking at how can they empower their employees to have all their customers to take advantage of this new generation of generative AI, but do it in a safe and controlled way. And I think that's really, if you look at what runs through a number of our announcements, that's kind of one of the key things that sits around the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think those were, I think, all very, very important. And you're right in terms of kind of how, things have certainly progressed. So let's dive into some of the topics kind of and focus on those. So certainly, as you said, that sort of AI and chip sort of space was really important, I think, this time around. So one of those announcements was around Amazon Q. So I thought that was interesting. That's kind of built around sort of it seemed to have like a business focus. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I think so. It was interesting when it came out. One of the things my team have been doing various bits of work on it. The first thing we did was go on, as we always do, and just really kick the tires on the thing. I think what I really liked about it is the fact that you could tie it so quickly, both the services that you have within AWS at the moment. So the ability to basically, for folk that haven't taken it, it's the ability to effectively a foundational model that we have with the ability to string together your own data, your own views around it. We started trying it a while back. We've had some interesting opportunities with it. I think being able to give it an S3 bucket and effectively say, go and learn this, go and understand what sits within that, or being able to give it API connectors is really, really good. And then the thing that I've been really impressed actually from my experimentation within it already is its ability to say, show your sources. I really like the concept that you can turn around and you can say, this is what you've told me. Why have you told it to me? Give me a link to the documentation. Give me a link to the document. And I think that's a really powerful thing when you understand what it's been trained on. Cool. I do think we're going through an interesting evolution in the world of foundational models. When you look at the amount of FMs that have been trained on everything from Reddit comment threads to Wikipedia to whatever it's picked up off 4chan effectively, and I think that is quite a dangerous thing in certain ways. I think moving to a point where we understand the training sets that are being used is going to be increasingly important. And I think one of the key things that we've wanted to lean in with Amazon Q is it's trained on your data. You can limit it, you can understand it. It's completely secure. Nothing's going to leak out. So I think there's definitely worries people have of whatever you're feeding into APIs, like what's actually happening to some of that
that
data.
is a concern. You're right. Yeah.
So you were really pleased with that. And the fundamentally, the way that we view this in the longer term, it's how do we start having AI as part of, as almost an assistant within your business? How does it become that additional person? And I think that's a really, really useful tool from my perspective.
Yeah, so that, I think the giving the reasons why is kind of providing those answers, giving you maybe the sources, as you said. So certainly in certain markets, where sort of copyright and legal and whatever needs to be sort of all above board, so to speak. I think that's really important to do. So that's quite cool. Yeah. So Amazon Q is certainly, I think, one of the the larger announcements there. And the other one that we mentioned just offline as well was Bedrock as well, right? So that was another one. So that's kind of a how would you guys kind of describe that? What's the sort of the best way to describe Bedrock?
Yeah, definitely. So the way we're thinking about this is we want to provide a platform that different foundational models can execute on. And yeah, we had some interesting announcements in terms of what those models are going to be. And they're everything from some of the closed source foundational models. So if you think of Anthropic's Claude, for example, but also, or our own Titan that we've built ourselves. But then also down into, we've announced some of the support for some of the additional open source ones. So Llama 2, for example, some of the Stable Diffusion. The best way to think of Bedrock, it's effectively a fundamental platform, hence the name, the Bedrock, which other foundational models can sit upon. So, you know, what we want to be able to do is provide those abilities to execute and to scale different FMs that are specifically focused to the task in hand. And being able to do that in a secure environment where you can train it with your own data. You know, it's an interesting situation if you think for some of the FM vendors. As soon as if those weights leak, or if those weights and that configuration of it kind of moves out of the building, that is an extraordinarily useful, important piece of IP. So it enables them to effectively do two things. One, to host it and scale it and manage it in something where they don't need to worry about the infrastructure, the nice cloud pieces around it. But then two, to enable people to customize those FMs in a nice, secure way, using those customers' individual data, but making sure they can't come out. So the way to think of it, it's almost, if I look at the abstractions that are occurring, it's close to that kind of app store or platform, but for foundational models to run on. So yes, it's really, really exciting stuff, actually. And that's both in terms of the ability to retrain the whole foundational model itself. And then also there's something called Bedrock Agents, which has come out recently, which is the ability to effectively put a vector knowledge graph on top of the FM without full retraining. So it's a really, really fun area. And also it's just nice to be able to see us hosting open source stuff. I'm a firm believer in open source. I think getting to a point where you can go through and you can select one of these usable and interesting open source models and deploy it in a safe, automated way is just fascinating from my perspective.
Yeah, I think, and was it also the what was the low code, no code tool that was it Party Rock or something? I think was that was part of that as well.
Party Rock is really fun. I genuinely think of things I've played about with. Party Rock is really interesting. So one of the things that so where do I think stuff's going? It's interesting. So I didn't think, or I'm surprised by how well you can chain LLMs together. And if you've not played with Party Rock, it's fascinating. So effectively, it works on the concept, and you can play with it free. We give free credits. There's all kinds of runs. So it works on the fact. Effectively, you can. It will ask you want to build a new Party Rock application, and you can literally say, you know, one of the examples we did for Vegas was suggestions of bars and restaurants to go in Vegas with various things. And by doing that, I mean it's a conference. We've got
absolutely
water
entertain the customers. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So you effectively put this in, and it uses the output of the initial statement of the program you want to make. It outputs and creates an application by chaining together multiple LLMs to get to it. And I think it really is this new paradigm in the world of coding that's starting to come together, with effectively LLMs acting as a platform which things sit over. And I think, where do I think it's going to go? Where are we looking at it going? It's the more that we can do that and integrate it with your own data, because I think the more that we can go to a situation where you can use that knowledge of your staff, you can know that that data is secure, the better. So I've been really, really amazed with how it's done. I think even from my perspective, and we thought Party Rock was pretty special when it was being put together. But I think we've been blown away by the uptake and by the interest that's come into it. It's just one of the most fun things that I've done. I've been involved in quite some time, actually.
Yeah, and it's kind of maybe bringing down the entry barrier as well to, you know, people who kind of want to play with these things. So a combination of Bedrock and Party Rock will kind of get people going who are not necessarily, you know, programmers or developers by heart or whatever. So it kind of gives them that opportunity, right?
Well, it comes on to one of the other announcements that I think one of the ones that some people may or may not have seen was Code Catalyst. So Code Catalyst was something really, really impressive to me. So Code Catalyst effectively takes it's the best way of thinking of it. It's a mixture of Amazon Q, some of our foundational models, and then some of our CI/CD pieces in it. So one of the things you can do with Code Catalyst is effectively it fits into development workflows. And say, for example, we've got an app running, and you've got a large business app. You've integrated in some of the Amazon stick already, and you decide, right, well, what we want to do is we want to make a new API functionality that sits with it, something relatively standard. But to get to that point, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to open tickets in our ticket tracking system. We're going to have to mark them open. We're going to have to do some kind of code merge. We have to do that scaffolding, and then we're going to have to do something within it.
Yeah.
Where Amazon Catalyst comes into this, you can literally in plain English type and say, I want to have a new issue that creates an API endpoint for, let's say, / print, and it's going to do that. It's going to print it back and do some text into it. You type that in plain English, it goes off. It will create the ticket within the ticket tracking system in the appropriate way. It will generate the code that it thinks off that initial piece. It won't merge it, but you can almost see where it would merge. Right. And the idea is that, if you think of those repeated tasks that that developers are doing, it removes so much of that. And I think one of the interesting things that, if I look at what is the core of AWS, well, a lot of it comes about non-differentiated heavy lifting is the overly wordy explanation we use. So, the more that we think about removing that non-differentiated heavy lifting, whether that's building your own database, or going to a point where you posting your service, things where that's a repeatable thing that you don't necessarily want to as part of your core business process. Yeah. But where part of, I think, our AI strategy really leads, which is fascinating for me, is doing the same thing, not just to the infrastructure level, but to more of that business process level. And you can see that in terms of some of the supply chain management announcements we had. And from my perspective, I come from a development background, so specifically doing that to development, getting to a point where your developers turn around, they want to add a function to it. Well, let's just type in English. They want to add the function. Let's do the code. Let's do the start off. Let's put in some testing into it as well. So yes, I'm absolutely fascinated by the process. I definitely recommend, and I think that will be one of the trends you'll see coming out. A number of the announcements is how can we best use humans and machines together to effectively all hopefully have a more productive, interesting time of life, and that really does excite me, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's really kind of all towards that sort of development goodness, and offering that sort of innovation with the aid of AI. I think that'll be quite interesting. I'd love to see. I'd love to see kind of what people are going to do with that in the next sort of year or so.
We've seen such interesting mixture of use cases coming in from this already. So that's everything from, we ran a hackathon with a large insurance company a few weeks ago that was just fascinating, seeing what they came out and what they could build with it. We're meeting with a bunch of interesting customers, especially some in the healthcare life sciences space. So it's really interesting, the implications that neural networks and effectively foundational models can have on healthcare life sciences and drug discovery is really interesting. And then finally, I think one of my most exciting meetings was with some folk within the weather industry. So there's all kinds of interesting side. If you look at weather prediction, it's fascinating. Yeah, it's big tech, which I always like. Lots of computation, and it's really interesting how quickly we're going to a point where neural networks can be informed of the current state, where the weather's going, where the climate's going, and effectively take all of that really large scale computation and move it into much smaller, quicker pieces. It's genuinely, I'm impressed by how we're seeing customers grab advantage. And I think part of it, there will be a huge advantage. The people that move quickly with this, there'll be an absolute huge advantage. You can kind of see it coming.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that's kind of all requires a lot of, processing and so on. And talking of processing, let's move on to the processor space. So one of the announcements was around Trainium 2, which is actually the AI specific chip. So it's kind of for HPC, for training for foundation models. Kind of, I think the bigger theme around that was kind of obviously, lowering the cost and producing or generating less, or requiring less energy and so on with the Trainium 2 chip as well.
Yeah. So I think this is really, I think this is part of the, if you look at some of the announcements we have, it's part of our big move to heterogeneous computing, which is a kind of overly grandiose term sometimes, but basically for using the right bit of computing in the right place. And that's really where we want to go with this. It's interesting as well, if you look at data center costs, I'm relatively geeky in these things. I like running data centers. And it's kind of interesting, if you look, actually a large amount of the costs within data centers come into energy. So it's a really important thing for us to reduce energy usage. Is, you know, it's the right thing for us, it's the right thing for the planet, and then also it's the right thing for customers, because one of the biggest things we can do to effectively reduce the cost that we pass on is reduce the energy that we use. So, you know, what you've definitely seen over the last few years, I mean, we bought a company called Annapurna Labs quite some time ago. They've been absolutely key to some of the interesting challenges that we've done in terms of the changes. So the design of the Nitro cards, which sits within every AWS server to offer some of the hardware virtualization, some of the security features, which are pretty unparalleled, all by them. And then now increasingly Annapurna are going off and designing, you know, really interesting advanced chips. Trainium 2 for us is our AI accelerator. And it's really cool what it could do, actually. I must admit, it's really, really cool with it. You know, Training 1 was impressive in the first place. So if you're looking at large scale machine learning, it's really good. So that's both for LLM training, for some of the more traditional things, for image recognition. Training 2 is even quicker. So it's about 4 times faster training than the first generation training chips. We can deploy it into some of the really cool bits we do. So we have something called an EC2 Ultra cluster, which is more than 100,000 of them joined together, which is just, you know, that's cool from my perspective.
That's the kind of stuff you like, John, right? That's the big stuff. You're into all that.
So it's really, but then I think where it's really interesting, it's, you know, and I think that's where we talk about some of these large 100,000 clusters and the pieces around this. I think when you start thinking of this in a cloud native way, it's really interesting, because effectively the choice that we want to give to our customers is, if you've got a lot of something to train, okay, you can go around and you can have, you know, you can, and it say for example, you've got 1,000 Trainium 2 machines, and it takes you a day to, so it takes you 100 days to train it. It's a really, really, really big model. Well, the fantastic thing about the cloud model is, well, actually, why do that? Just all you want to do is take it the other way, shift left, rather than having 1,000 instances running, go to 100,000, and instead of doing 100 days, go to 1 day. And I think that's the really interesting thing from my perspective, is that when you've got these large jobs to go, you can just, you know, go up, scale up really quickly, and scale back down. So as much as, you know, the excitement for me is using these pieces of tech, it's the ability to flex this over time. And so so with Trainium 2, for example, we've put in a bunch of changes. The performance is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I've seen there's all interesting stuff that we have within our roadmaps, and when I saw this a while back, I must admit I was blown away with what we've managed to do. It's genuinely quite impressive. So you had that as one of the fun announcements.
Definitely, yeah. And just to read off some of the numbers on that kind of came out of the announcement. So obviously, as we said, they're kind of optimized for foundation models. So it said it can handle hundreds of billions to trillions of parameters in that FM model. It's 4 times faster than Trainium 1. And it's I think produces 65 exaflops of supercompute performance. So very good. I think that sounds like a, you know, quite impressive stats there.
It's brilliant. I mean, and it comes down to, you know, what I think is interesting as well. I mean, you can see that we've numbered the things as well as it sounds. So you can imagine, you know, we're able now to iterate at such a rate around these, and I think that's one of the really important things and interesting things for the future. You know, for us designing our own hardware gives us that flexibility to really spin the dart in the same way that, you know, you've seen us reduce price so many times over the years. You've seen us scale out. Our ability just to keep doing that at an absolute rate of knots is going to be key to where we end up. And I think doing that while we reduce energy uses. And then, you know, the same, you were mentioning Inferentia too. So, you know, we've been pretty specific in terms of building infrastructure for specific things. So Trainium is very, very good at the training side of things. And then for us, Inferentia and Inferentia 2 are specifically designed to offer that lowest cost inference in the cloud. You know, I think that's going to be an increasingly important thing. It's interesting when I look at the uptick of these machine learning models. At the moment, everyone's kind of, most people, or we find most customers I talk to, everyone's focusing on the training side of things, and you know, how are we going to train this? How are we going to make this work? And partly that's because, yeah, they're early in the development cycle, or they're midway through it. There is a much, much, much more important thing coming over the hill for everyone, and that's going to be, okay, well, now we've trained these models. Now your customers are using this. Now every time that, you know, you're logging on to your website, or you're talking to someone, you're using these models. Well, actually, how are we going to continue to run these at scale? How are we going to do this at a price point that makes sense? And I think that's where the inferentia side comes in. I mean, I'm not going to I won't say the name of the Amazon smart speaker, as she'll wake up behind my thing and start talking.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, for us, Alexa wouldn't be possible without us using inferentia.
Sure.
It underpins that price performance that
Sure.
that is needed to it. And I think a lot of startups will start to do the same thing, actually.
Definitely. So the other big announcement was around Graviton 4.
Yes.
So this is kind of the more wider range sort of workload processor. And again, it's said that it was the most powerful AWS processor so far. It's the and again, just kind of read off some of the statistics on that. 4th generation in 5 years, which I think is quite impressive. I think not even Intel manages to do kind of churn out stuff and that quickly. And it's definitely not kind of in that Intel way of doing things, kind of that TikTok approach that they have in terms of their strategy. It's 50% more cores, 75% more memory bandwidth on there apparently. Overall, 30% better performance than Graviton 3, the previous generation. 40% faster on database applications. 45% rather faster on Java applications. So that's saying something when it comes to accelerating Java apps. So let's face it, Java apps need all the all the help they can get. So I think those are all the kind of really good, impressive stats that I picked up on.
And I think what's interesting. I think ARM on the server side is coming of age at the moment.
Yes.
I think if you look back at I mean, it's interesting. You go back in the mists of time, and some people that listening to this might be old enough. I'm sure you were probably to remember the HP Moonshot servers that came out a long while ago, where they initially started to put ARM in. Back then the performance wasn't there, and now where it's interesting is ARM in the server side and Graviton in the server side. It's absolutely pushing the envelope of what can be done. And I think what's so interesting for me is the savings that come through from it, and two, the energy savings that come through from it. I think as we increasingly focus on sustainability, I think that's absolutely key. But what's really nice to see is a couple of years ago, I mean, I tinker a lot, the best way of putting it. And I started defaulting to spinning up ARM servers a while back, because I thought, dog food, what we do. Yeah, and it was challenging at first. I mean, being transparent, I think actually some of the libraries weren't there. There were more challenges. Now, I don't even notice the difference. I think there's been so much advancement within the development tool chain to sit around ARM that it's absolutely fascinating. I think the fact as well that I mean, I'm sitting here using an ARM Mac. I think the fact actually that ARM has now gone down to the desktop. In fact, actually now in thinking of my home setup, I'm now at a situation where I think I've got one Intel server in the basement, and the rest of it actually is all pretty much gone to ARM, and that includes consoles and so it's really interesting actually. And I think that advancement of the tool chain just means it's just so much easier for people to pick it up, run with it, and do all kinds of interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I did also cover I think in my monthly talk class, State of Play, I did cover a sort of one of the topics was sort of Intel versus ARM sort of thing as well, and kind of how ARM is kind of up and coming, especially in the AI space. And obviously, mobile and so on has been established for a number of years now. But yeah, that was quite interesting. So I'll try and maybe put a link in the description of the video to that.
I would love to see that actually. I think that sounds genuinely. I'll
send you the link.
That myself. Actually. Yeah, thank you. I think it is. Why do I think? So in the long term, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. So there's people talk about Moore's law and this kind of slightly, but actually what's interesting, and some people don't realize, is all of this is based on something called Wright's law, a much older law by an airplane fuselage engineer in 1938. Okay. And he or 1930, it might be 38, but in 1930, so. And he effectively coined this thing called Wright's law, basically the concept of learning by doing. So he worked out for airplane fuselages, the more airplane fuselages you make, the cheaper it becomes to make one. And he viewed this as an inherent technological law about the more you make of something, the cheaper it becomes. And that's solely because as you make more of it, you understand how to optimize. You kind of do this learn by doing approach. Yeah. Where I think it's interesting is the amount of ARM CPUs which are being fabbed every day in comparison with the number of x86 CPUs. And there's just way more, way more. I have more ARM devices here. You know, I will have more ARM devices next year. And I think that's going to increasingly be this accelerant that effectively speeds up the progress of them. So yeah, it's a really interesting space to watch at the moment.
Definitely, yeah. And so I think you know, with all these sort of chip announcements that you guys have made, this is definitely kind of putting AWS in that, you know, undisputed leader sort of, you know, position when it comes to, you know, training you know, AI models and also showing the commitment I think that AWS is showing in terms of the infrastructure that's needed. And also I think as you know, as with the likes of Bedrock, really showing some of those really early difficult things that probably organizations find to kind of put together to get to where they want in the software stack. You guys are kind of giving them a leg up on that to allow them to really get to the point where they can really focus on the things that they should be focusing on, right? Which is training and their data sets and so on.
Exactly. And I think that's the, you know, a lot of the point of us doing this with Amazon Q, for example, and there's been some other really interesting, so Amazon Connect for Amazon Q for Connect. So Amazon Connect is something that I find really interesting. I mean, if it wasn't for Amazon Connect, it's our call center effectively, well, not call center, our telephone mediating thing. So you can build call centers in software really easily. It's, you know, one of the fun things I did a while back, I built myself my own little call center that if I wanted to give my number to someone who I didn't necessarily thought it was, I put it through an automatically built-in call center number. It's kind of a fun experiment for anyone who wants to learn. It's surprisingly easy. You pay on demand, which was fun. So yes, so went through and done that, and I think the fact that we're going to take some of that knowledge intelligence into Connect as well is really interesting. I think the more that we can help people by taking away some of that non-differentiated heavy lifting, and you know, I think there is so much of that in the world of AI. You know, realistically, we're not going to be able to find the amount of core AI scientists that are needed. The only way that we can all take advantage of it and customers take advantage is by trying to see how we can effectively layer that in the same way that we have with some of the other bits. So I'm really excited about it. I think it's been that for me was one of the most interesting things. And it's one of these things that I now have up and running. I've been doing some pair programming with it today. So it's really interesting, really interesting stuff.
Fantastic. Okay. So let's move on to some of the other announcements as well. So one I picked up on was the cost optimization hub. So I thought this was really good because it's kind of painted as a, you know, one-stop shop for sort of recommended actions for cost saving. You have all your sort of, you know, all of those recommendations are kind of centralized, so you get them to see them of your sort of VPC environment or environments. It's kind of tailored suggestions as part of that to kind of give you, you know, a sort of a better cost management, and also getting the chance to actually do some actionable insights as well. So you have the ability to do that directly from the hub, which is really good because, I mean, you can throw a lot of graphs on this and so on, but I think the cool thing about it is actually taking an action and being able to set up something, maybe even automate that process so that next time that sort of thing happens, let's say, you know, developers sort of, you know, puts up some resources in AWS, they forget to take them down. Obviously, that will cost them money. So how can we save on that? How can we automate that process? Well, maybe we can get that done through, you know, the cost optimization hub. It will actually go in maybe after a month or 2 weeks or whatever it is. You know, it will kind of go off and kill off those resources that are not needed, and then obviously, you know, save some money on that. So with that, as well as that kind of capability, also I think was mentioned that it can have a customizable dashboard as well, so you can obviously tailor it to your preferences. So I think that's a really good thing. You guys, I think, announced a whole bunch of stuff around cloud cost optimization at the last reInvent, but this is really good to see all of those kind of coming into one place.
Exactly. And one of the things we're trying to do is just make it dramatically easier for people to manage this. You know, I think you'd be surprised, or maybe you would be, but I think you probably wouldn't be surprised. But I think some people would be surprised. The amount of time that my team spends trying to reduce people's costs is exactly kind of where we want to go. Like that's the desire for us, is people to do, you know, effectively succeed by reducing that unit cost and what they're doing. Some really interesting stuff. Carpenter out there. If you've not used Carpenter, I could not recommend it enough. It is, you know, top tier in terms of things that we've released and open source. And I think the cost management hub for us is just starting to get that into a place where it can be viewed both by the engineers that are on the ground and actually understood by the whole of that stack. And I think also that coming back to, I think you said it really well, actually. Those actionable insights is where we want to go. What can I do next? What's the next shortest path? And I think, we're going to increasingly focus on some of that, actually, because I think it's just really key to all of us being successful.
Yeah, I did get a flavor of what you're saying about your guys kind of working. I attended an AWS technical account manager meeting or something, and they had lots of customer sort of stories in it. And I think the guys who were presenting were all TAMs. And, they said, we spent like, 60-70% of our time on cost optimization for our customers, and actually be on site and, be engaged in what the customer is doing. So I think that's really cool. Okay, so that was kind of cost optimization hub. Now, the other one that also caught my eye, and there was a lot of cheering and clapping for this, which was quite, I guess a lot of people maybe were, wanted to see it, was the Amazon S3 Express One Zone.
Yes.
So this is kind of a new storage class, purpose-built to deliver highest performance and low latency for object storage for customers, for essentially their really most, or maybe I should say really most frequently accessed data.
Yeah, exactly. So for us, it's basically a new tiering class that sits within S3, specifically for those places where, you want lots of access. We can reduce the cost on that. There are, effectively you go into, you have site penalties that come around some of the redundancy and some of the durability that sits around that data. But it's really what we found customers are asking, especially for things. If I look at some of the typical use cases I see coming for it, it'll be those scratch data sets, those things where you're kind of reading and writing multiple objects quickly from different machines. But what you really want is that kind of absolutely edge of performance. And it's one of the things I've really liked about this announcement. Effectively, what we've announced is something that is both faster and cheaper at the same time, which is quite a fun thing to come out, because normally, if you look at some of the tiering announcements that come out from similar companies, there'll be a new tier of storage that we're going to charge more money for. And we've really, by looking back at the customer requirements that sit around it, we've really hopefully gone to this situation where actually what we're going to do is the best of both worlds. For the right storage use cases, we see it as being something that's going to be really popular, actually. And so far, we've had some really good beta testers already who've done all kinds of interesting use cases.
And it's kind of maybe fair, kind of with sort of AWS kind of getting a little bit of pushback on sort of access speeds and costs and things like that. But with this one, again, the part of the announcement says the data access speed is up to 10 times faster, and the request costs 50% lower than S3 standard.
It's brilliant. I mean, it's an S3 standard, quite honestly, is pretty good at the moment, in all honesty. I mean, that's what kind of really blew me away by this. And it comes back to us, and we've had to do some really interesting re-architecture behind the scenes to get this to work. But I think there are so many use cases where you have these large distributed training farms, where you have these big kind of bits of data. I think it should be really useful, actually. I would definitely, for the right place in architectures, there'll be some really significant benefits, both in performance and in costing for folk.
Yeah, definitely. So I think again it came out that they were saying it negates the need for caching of transactions or before you transact, which is again good. So presumably that's kind of some of the techniques that people have kind of put into place to get over those maybe latency issues. And obviously the real time sort of performance was in single digits in terms of latency. So again, very, very good.
That's great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Next one along for me was the zero ETL integrations. So that's the extract, transform, load, I presume, ETL. And this was kind of really, I think, connecting kind of sources to destinations when it comes to data. So if you're hoarding stuff, as a lot of customers do, kind of in certain databases, if you want to kind of take them off to, for further analytics, maybe kind of feed them or enrich them before they go into AI, become a kind of an AI data set and so on. There's also all sorts of kind of stuff that needs to be done, and it needs to be cleansed and corrected. The data needs to be corrected before it kind of gets enriched and things like that. So this was kind of going from so that ETL has now kind of been removed, going from the source to the destination. So there was lots of examples, but I'll read out a few of those. They said things like Amazon Aurora, kind of has zero ETL integration with Amazon Redshift, for example. Again, same thing for DynamoDB going to Redshift. Again, zero ETL integration required for that. So again, Amazon may be identifying some of those things that have been kind of, it's got to do it, as a customer, we've got to put this bit in between, and you guys are kind of making it easier for customers and removing that.
And that's the goal. We deal with so many customers who have this. It's interesting when you see the concept years and years ago, well, not years ago now. The data lakes that started to turn up. So we've talked to a number of customers who have told us they don't have data lakes, they have data swamps.
Yeah,
and I think that's
exactly. I've heard that before, actually.
It's sadly too regular a thing. And I think part of that is because they've had these really big ETL systems. You've had data in one place here. You've had these kind of mid-tiered systems. You've had where you want the data to get to. I mean, I've dealt with one. There's interesting customers who, I've heard of copies of 5, 10. I heard one customer with or one general, not necessarily our customer, but one person within the rich tapestry of IT, who I think had somewhere with 25 copies of all of their data for one of their data swamps.
Wow!
And I think one of
that is a big swamp, actually.
It really is a big swamp. I mean, it's a very expensive, very unwieldy swamp, and it's one as well. When you want to move it, you have to move all of these subcomponents with it.
Yes.
One of the things that zero ETL should make it just. It's just the right thing to do for customers, that in theory you will end up with some of your source systems, and then where do we want the data out, and the ability to pull that all in real time, I think is going to be really, really impressive. I think we'll see more and more of the industry going this route, and it's a combination of things that have allowed us to do this. It's a combination of the increase in storage speeds, increase in networking speeds that come through it, and the increase in processing capacity, both from individual units itself and that ability to burst that processing capacity when needed.
Definitely.
And architecturally, some of these have been relatively challenging to do, but we're now in a situation where actually I think we are going into this new zero ETL framework for many different applications.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a really smart move. I think that's going to help a lot of people, definitely. Okay, so let's move on to what was the most interesting talk or a set of talks for you, or maybe even kind of a particular theme that you picked up on,
so these are the two things that I really enjoyed. So I really enjoyed some of the innovation talks. I think that's one of the things that I've gone through, and I've rewatched all of them actually now so far, and I think that was a really good thing. I mean, one of the things that I would say to people, we as a company are kind of interesting. We're innovating ourselves at the moment, and we're integrating with so many other customers that are doing the same thing, that we get quite a unique view on the market. I think there were some really good innovation talks. Some of the ones that I really liked actually was by our lead of analytics. So it was data-driven transformation with data foundation at AWS Analytics. I thought that was really good actually. I think we had a really good one from our president of AI/ML of innovate faster with generative AI. But I would say, overall, I think the innovation talks I absolutely loved.
Right.
The other thing that I liked hearing about, which we've had some interesting announcements, is our Kuiper satellite side of things. I think that is going to be really, really interesting. I mean, we made a public announcement, which I don't think made reInvent quite, but it's just been come out about the fact that we're going to be offering sat to sat. There's going to be effectively, we're going to build a laser mesh between these satellites, which is just it's really cool.
I saw the globe picture of that. Did you post it? I think you reposted it or something.
I think I reposted it. It's always nice when Jassy posts something that I find is really interesting. I can repost it. So effectively, though, we've now talked publicly on something which we hadn't talked publicly about before, which is always fun, especially when you've been involved with it quite heavily. The fact that if you think Project Kuiper for us is literally thousands of satellites going up in the next couple of years with a view of offering high-speed internet down to every point on the globe, and as well as being able to offer connectivity up, having that ability to build a laser mesh in terms of the communication is really, really interesting. There's my background is low latency, and I think it's so I think it'd be really interesting to see some of the use cases that are possible. People don't necessarily realize, but the latency you get from going down fiber is relatively impactful sometimes. It's almost like imagine a drunk person walking back from the pub, bouncing off the different sides of the road. And what we'll have the ability.
We're all familiar with that, John.
We have the ability to go up to the satellites, move it over through a vacuum or a near vacuum, and straight back down. So yeah, I'm really genuinely excited about the whole thing. So yeah, I thought the stuff was brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one that I found interesting was, I believe it was on day 2, the refactoring to serverless. So that was a really interesting talk. It talked about the Amazon CDK, which is the cloud development kit, kind of going beyond making the code serverless. And it actually even just kind of looked at, sort of existing code and how it can be kind of, moved to the next sort of stage, so to speak. And then separating, this was an interesting idea, separating the business logic from the application topology was one of the kind of themes that they mentioned as part of the refactoring to serverless. So that was quite interesting as well. And then obviously, replacing kind of custom in-house code, with fully managed cloud services. Again, that's something that's fairly logical in terms of doing that.
I would say on the serverless side, for people that haven't looked at SnapStart, is absolutely amazing. For folks that haven't seen it, is genuinely one of the most impressive things we do for Java workloads. So it's these interesting services that we put huge amounts of work behind the scenes, and people, when you start thinking about it, you can realize why it's as difficult as it is. But effectively, it's the ability to take Java applications running, snap them, so effectively take a view of that memory footprint, and then spin that up in a serverless way. So effectively spinning up almost multiple copies of that running already initialized thing. It is an amazing thing. If you're doing anything with Spring, anything with serverless, SnapStart, Lambda SnapStart, absolutely one of the coolest things we have.
Cool. Excellent.
Brilliant.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously there's no way for us to be able to cover everything. There's lots more there, but hopefully this is kind of giving the viewers a sort of a good announcement, or rather summary of the announcements that were made, all the major stuff that happened. So John, I want to just thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate doing this review with me. We need to kind of do our predictions thing, I think, for next year. So I'll try and arrange that as soon as possible with you.
Definitely. Would love to talk. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on these things. It's always, I think genuinely one of the most interesting people I get to talk in this field. So love talking to you. I always got a viewpoint on things as well, which is
definitely
useful.
We always have something to say. We're quite opinionated people, so definitely. But yeah, that'll be cool to do. All the links for everything that we've discussed, as much as I can, I will promise to put that in the description of the video. I would also appreciate you, if you're enjoying these talks and these videos, please do consider subscribing to the channel. That helps me to kind of support me in kind of going forward. That'll be really good. Yeah, that's it for this review. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this talk. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, share, like, and subscribe to support the channel. You may also want to check out some of the other videos on this channel. See you next time.